Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make an Irish cabbage bacon soup, some yummy melts with our sourdough bread, and then we're going to make a discard double chocolate muffin. So let's start with our soup. We're going to use a pound of bacon. So I'm just going to kind of slit it open, and we're going to just do a coarse chop on this, and we're going to let it kind of cook up in our Dutch oven over medium heat. And this is going to be the kind of the meat base for our cabbage soup. A lot of times in Ireland, they'll use like corned beef as well. But this one's also a good like option if you don't have corned beef or, leftover corned beef from a roast. But it's going to be delicious. So just a simple chop on our bacon because you want them to be kind of a heartier piece in our soup. So I'm going to turn my Dutch oven on to medium high around a 7. And then we're going to add in our bacon. And then let me chop up 1 onion, and we're going to throw that in there in just a second too. So we're going to cut off both ends, and then we're going to peel this. We're going to get rid of all of the skins and the sides. And then I'm going to chop my onion in half. And then we're going to do about 5 slices down. And then we'll just do a basic dice and chop across. We'll do the same thing, about 5 slices down across. And then kind of a simple dice. Okay, we're going to let our bacon heat up. And once it starts to crisp, then we'll add in our onions. But while we're waiting, we're going to step over and work on our muffins. So let me give my hands a quick rinse because I got some bacon on them. Okay, so today we are going to be making our sourdough discard double chocolate muffins. Delicious. Okay, we're going to start with all of our wet ingredients in our pan. So we're going to add in 1/3 cup of milk. I already poured it in here so I could put my milk back in the fridge. So 1/3 cup of milk. I'm using whole milk because that's what we have around. And then we are going to add in a 1/2 cup of melted butter, which is 1 stick. And you could use oil if you wanted to, but I prefer melted butter in my baked goods. I just think it tastes better. And then we're going to add in a 1/3 cup of discard, which is perfect because I want to feed my sourdough starter so I can make some homemade bread tonight. So we're going to add in 1/3 cup of discard. Perfect. And I'm just going to shake it out. Excellent. I'm going to set this over here so I remember to feed it because I want to feed it a couple hours before my bread is. So I added the discard in. This is going to be for our double chocolate muffins. And then we're also making a Irish cabbage soup with bacon and then some melts. Now we're going to add in a 3/4 of a cup of sour cream. So I'm going to just kind of eyeball it. I use my little measuring thing as a visual to kind of eyeball my 3/4 of a cup. It's about right. And give or take a few. And then we're going to start mixing this together. And then we'll add in our vanilla and our eggs in just a second. But we're going to mix together our milk, our discard, and our butter and our sour cream. And this is kind of the wet base for our delicious double chocolate muffins. Okay, I'm going to give our bacon over here a nice stir. Again, this is for our Irish cabbage soup. Okay, mix it up. I'm just trying to break down. It's okay if your like sour cream is still a little clotted in there. As we mix more, it will again work its way into the batter. Okay, now we're going to add in our 2 eggs. So there we go. 1 and 2. And then we're going to add in 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And this will add just a lovely flavor along with the cocoa powder that we're going to use in a little bit and the chocolate chips. So 1, 2. Oh, the smell of bacon cooking is just delicious. Smells so yummy over here. I'm going to give it a nice little stir too. Look at me stirring 2 things at one time. Okay. I'm going to turn my skillet down to about a 5 or 6. Okay, so I'm incorporating my eggs and my vanilla into our liquid mixture. And I'm just making sure I've got all of that egg yolk and egg white mixed around. Sometimes it can kind of stay gooey together. So just kind of like hit it with your spatula a couple of times to really make sure it gets incorporated. Okay. Because we want to do most of the mixing now. Once we get to adding the flour in, we don't want to mix as much because that will turn it into a stiff dough or batter, which will lead to a stiff muffin. And we want a nice soft muffin. Okay, we are going to add in 1 teaspoon of baking soda. So this is going to give the little pop. So 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And then a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. Or not a 1/4, a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, sorry. A 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. And then we're going to add in a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. There. Perfect. And we're going to give this a good mix so that all of our rising agents can get activated and moved around in our whole liquid batter. This takes out the part of having to sift the flour with the baking soda and salt. There we go. Okay, now we are going to add in 1 cup of sugar. Beautiful. And then we're going to add in a 1/2 cup of cocoa powder. Let me grab a measuring cup over here. Oh, perfect. Got a 1/2 cup. A 1/2 cup of cocoa powder. And this is where our chocolatey goodness flavor will come along with our chocolate chips. So get in here and add. This is also going to give it its nice rich color. We're done with that. And then again, before I mix my flour, and I'm going to mix these 2 ingredients. That way I won't overmix the flour. Because again, if you overmix the flour in your batter, it's going to lead to a stiff muffin. And you want to have a nice soft muffin. So I'm just mixing around, grabbing up, trying to grab the batter, scooping it along the sides, because I will say cocoa powder doesn't always want to mix in right away. It likes to rest on top, kind of like how cinnamon does. There we go. Beautiful. Perfect. So now we have it mixed up very nicely. And now we can add in our 2 cups of all-purpose flour. So 1 and 2. Simple. Let's give our Dutch oven, before we mix that in, let's give this a little stir. We've got the bacon cooking up here. Again, bacon just smells delicious. And that's going to be for our Irish cabbage soup. Okay, we're mixing in our flour. Now the trick is not to over mix this, which is why I like to do it with a spatula instead of a hand mixer, because a hand mixer, it's really easy to over mix. So we're just mixing it until it's just barely incorporated, because we don't want a stiff muffin. There we go. So now it's just barely incorporated, and we're going to add in our chocolate chips. So we're going to add in 1.5 cups of chocolate chips for our double chocolate muffins. And I have some leftover mini ones, and then I'm going to use some of my big ones. And this will be for our sourdough discard double chocolate muffins. That will go with our Irish cabbage soup and our melt. So there is about, I want to say, 1/2 cup left in here. So we're going to need about 1 cup in this. You could also use chocolate chunks if you wanted to. That will give you more of like a luxurious feel. And you could use a measuring cup if you wanted, but I find visual is pretty good. There's about 2 cups of chocolate chips in every bag, in case you didn't know. Here we go. So let's mix in our chocolate chips. So now you see how it's going to be so chocolatey and delicious. And it doesn't take much to mix them in. And beautiful. Because I used butter, it's a slightly thicker batter than if you were to use oil. But again, I feel like it has a much nicer taste. Okay, before we spoon these in, I'm going to add in my onions to our bacon over here, because the bacon's kind of starting to get a nice texture to it. And we're going to allow the onions to cook in the bacon grease. And that's going to add just a lovely flavor to the broth of our soup. So give this a nice stir. And we're going to let those kind of caramelize up in the bacon grease for our Irish cabbage stew. Okay. I have my oven, sorry about that, preheated to 425 degrees. These are going to cook a little hotter. And they only need about 12 minutes to cook. So they'll be done pretty fast. So my oven's preheated. I'm going to pop these, our little foil ones, into our cupcake or tin. I like to use foil because I just feel like it cooks a little bit nicer than the parchment paper ones, but to each its own. And then let me grab a spoon. I think it's easier to fill up the muffin tins with a spoon than it is with thing. We're just gonna fill each one in nicely, and then we'll come back over and try to make them as even as possible. But it is a nice thick batter, and that thickness comes from the butter, which I think just gives it a little bit more of an elegant flavor to it than oil. Almost all of my baked goods I use butter in. And it's simple. In any recipe you have, you can really just switch it out. Melted butter for like oil, like 1 for 1. It doesn't need to have a special ratio at all. Okay. And I'm just going to go back over some of my ones that are a little bit less and add them up. I always like to fill my muffin tins all the way up to the top. I don't do like the 2/3 or 3/4. I like it to the top. There we go. Almost done putting this guy in. And these are they're delicious. It reminds me of like when you were a kid at your school, you could buy muffins, and they were like the Otis Spunkmeyer muffins, and they had the double chocolate, the banana nut, and the blueberry, and double chocolate was always my favorite. Growing up, you could grab there. And so these are they're moist and delicious like those. I feel like you can never make a muffin taste like an Otis Spunkmeyer muffin, but these are close. There we go. We're almost done. I'll have enough to make a couple more after I have these baked. But these are just about ready to pop in the oven. Okay. We'll save that over. Let's pop these in the oven real quick. Let me wash my fingers. Got a little chocolate on it. Okay. So these are going in my oven at 425 degrees. I'm actually going to grab my oven mitts. That was from baking yesterday. Let's bring down. You don't want it super high to the top, otherwise you'll burn the top of your muffin. So typically right in the middle. Perfect. And then I'm going to set a timer for 12 minutes, and that's when I'll know to come grab them. Okay, well, let's work on our stew a little bit now that we have our onions and our bacon cooking up. Let's work on it, and then we'll do our melts, and then our muffins will be done. Okay, so we're gonna add in 3 carrots. So I'm gonna give them a quick peel to just get their outer skin off of them. You're always gonna wanna peel carrots when you get them if they haven't been peeled, because that outer skin doesn't taste as nice, and it will give your carrots a much chewier texture. So you want a nice carrot, make sure you peel it. And it doesn't take too long to peel up. Now you could already use the baby carrots. Those work well. Then you don't have to do any peeling. Just got to give them a quick chop. Okay, so we've got these. We're going to cut off the tips of our carrots. And since these are fairly thin carrots, I'm not going to halve them at all. I'm just going to give them a small slice on them. I'll cut these up, and then I'm going to throw them in with the bacon and onions and let them take up some of the bacon flavor while we prep our potatoes. And this is like a very hearty soup. It's delicious, especially if you love cabbage. I love like a cabbage cooked in any type of broth. It's just so delicious. And then we have a bunch of, these are just little baby potatoes. We're going to cut them in half, and then we're going to add them into our pot. You could use bigger new potatoes and just cut them up a little bit more. But you don't want them too big because you want them to tender up, and then you want to be able to eat them nicely in your soup. And I find these little baby guys are perfect. And they cook up nicely. Their skins are nice and tender. You know, if you're using a russet potato, you'd have to peel it. Russet potatoes aren't as good for soup, so I, would recommend using either one of these little guys or baby Dutch or yellow or gold potatoes. Those work the best because their skin is nice and they're a little bit more waxy and they hold up better.
You have a question? Are the potatoes going to get too mushy before the carrots are done?
No, these are, so that using these type of potatoes, they retain their texture in your soup. So they are not like a russet. A russet potato would get mushy, but these carrots will be tender within like 50, yeah. These carrots will be tender within like 15 minutes cooking in the broth, and the same with the potatoes. So they'll cook up for the longer time. But if you were to use a russet potato, the longer you cook a russet potato, it completely disintegrates. So these potatoes have a bit more of a waxier feeling. They're just a different texture, and they hold their shape and body in soups and stews, which is why they're recommended for that, and not so much for mashed potatoes. They make a really sticky mashed potato. So it's the same thing. It's like with onions. Certain onions are used for, soups, and others aren't. But the potatoes, these will keep their body and their form lovely, and they won't get mushy. They'll just be nice and tender. We got a few more that we're going to pop in here. And I always cut, even though some of these are pretty tiny, I always like to cut them in half because they can really soak in the flavor of the broth. And so you have a nice, lovely flavored potato versus just leaving them whole. There we go. So let's pop these guys in here. We'll give it a quick stir. And then we're going to add in some seasonings, and then we'll add in some broth. And lastly, we'll add in the cabbage once we have the broth in there. Okay, so we're going to put in about a teaspoon of pepper, of black ground pepper. I'm going to use 2 bay leaves, and I'm going to give them a quick crush up. That way their flavors will be more in the broth. And when you crush it up, you don't really notice their harder, crunchy textures. So really giving it a nice crush. And that way the broth will really absorb the flavor of the bay leaf. And then we're going to add in 4 cups of water, and then a big heaping scoop of chicken bouillon. There we go. So I'm going to give that a stir. And then let me grab a spoon. We're going to do a big scoop of bouillon. And you could use straight up chicken broth if you wanted to, but I find bouillon just packs a bit more of that punch. So a nice scoop, and this is where most of the saltiness in our soup is going to come from. I'm not going to add any extra salt. The chicken, bouillon does it all. So we're going to give this a nice stir, just getting all the bouillon off my spoon. Beautiful. And then we're going to let that simmer, and I'm going to cut up some cabbage to throw into our soup.
You have a question? What is bouillon?
Bouillon is so it comes in either powder form or paste, but it's literally like chicken broth that has been reduced down with some salt. So it's like, this one's a paste. You can get it in a cube, but it's taken the broth and they've just reduced it until there's no water left in it, but all of the delicious flavors. So we're going to peel off some leaves of cabbage for our soup. The cabbage will wilt up, so it might look like a lot, but it wilts up and gets a bit smaller in our soup. So there's our cabbage. I'm going to give them a quick rinse, just in case they have a little bit of dirt or anything on their leaves. Shake, 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 shake. And then we're just going to just chop these up into manageable pieces, because you don't want to leave any cabbage leaves too big. Otherwise, you're going to be eating your soup and you'll pull out a whole leaf, and it's just a little bit harder to manage. So we're going to first start by making about 1-inch slices all the way across. And then we can rotate and we can do the exact same going the opposite way. So you're essentially going to have kind of 1-inch around kind of squares. There we go. And now if you wanted to double this recipe, you could use a lot more cabbage. Just do it in a great big pot.
Do you have a question? Who do you make all this food for?
Well, we have a big family. I have 5 kids, so there's 7 of us in our home every single day. And then I also cook for my parents. So I typically cook for about 9 people every single day. So none of this food goes to waste. Always finds a belly to eat. And since we are so large, we eat a lot more than most people. There we go. So I've got my thing. I'm going to wait until my soup comes to a boil, and then I'll add in the cabbage. And now we can prep our melts while we are waiting. Let me just wipe up our area. So we're going to be using up our sourdough that we made the other day. And then tonight, we're going to make another batch of sourdough bread for tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm going to be making chicken noodle soup, because one of my dear friends, her partner is battling pretty bad cancer, stage 4, and I like to bring them some stuff, and they requested some sourdough and chicken noodle soup, so I'm going to bring them some fresh stuff there. Let's get all of this. We have this has our chive and Dubliner cheese, which is similar to a cheddar, but it's an Irish cheese. We got Irish loaf. And then this is our just good old basic sourdough. And let me get our cheeses and our toppings. Okay. My daughter, she requested, Mom, make me a grilled cheese with some sun-dried tomatoes. So I was like, I will make that for lunch for you today. No worries. Our kids are home on spring break, so we also go through a lot more food when they are home from school, because, I pack their lunches and thing, but I swear when they're home, it's like they have to eat every 5 minutes. So we'll do that. We're going to get our sourdough, and let's see. I think we'll do you want yours on sourdough, or do you want yours on?
I'll take
the special
one.
Ooh, the specialty one. Yeah, I figured you might take that one as well. There we go. So as you see, we make this up and we do eat it. This is our lunch for the day. And then we go through a lot of food with 9 mouths. And then, of course, we'll have cousins over and stuff like that. And so it's always, our fridge is like more like a revolving door. It's open and food in nonstop. Okay.
On any given day, we provide food for 11 to 13 people typically.
Yeah, it is crazy. We're just one big crazy family. And then, you know, of course, our kids have friends in the neighborhood. And then it's like, we feed the neighborhood kids too. That's why I say when I make like a batch of muffins or cupcakes, those are going to be gone within a day. And that's only with people getting like one because we just have so many people in and out of our house, which is nice. I grew up in a large family. I'm the youngest of 10. So I kind of know what a big family is and the chaos and then all the friends that come with it. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. I love it. Even being the baby, it was, you know, that's why I said I always wanted to have a big family, and I'm done at 5, but 5 is still pretty big, and I love it. Just going to turn up my soup just a little bit, and I'm going to give it a nice little stir. It's starting to really warm up. You can see the steam coming off of it. Beautiful. Okay, so for our sandwiches today, I'm going to do a triple cheese melt because I love just straight up grilled cheeses. For my husband, he is going to get a little bit of a spicy one. He's going to get pepper jack and pepperoni. So we'll see if he can. I can't handle any spice, so I'm a big baby when it comes to that. But he says he loves pepper jack, and so we'll make this one for him. Apparently last time I made him with pepper jack, I only used 1 layer, and he was like, I could have done 2. I can handle 2. Okay, and then for my daughter, she's going to get mozzarella, pepperoni, and sun-dried tomatoes on hers. You know, as long as there's sun-dried tomatoes, that was the one thing. She's like, you have to make it with the sun-dried tomatoes. And they're the best. But guess what? We didn't even get there. I think our muffins are just about done. So let's go and grab those out. See why you always have to set a timer, because otherwise you forget about things. Let's see how they turned out, if they're ready. Oh, beautiful. They are ready. See that lovely pop on them? This is why you fill them to the top. It gives you that bakery feel. Now these are a treat. I know they're called muffins, but they're really like more than a muffin. But muffin makes them healthier, right? Okay, I'll put these right here to cool. But beautiful, and it's a great way to use our sourdough discard because we wanted to get that in there. Okay, let me turn my soup down just a bit, and I'm gonna continue putting on the cheese. Okay, and then for mine, I'm gonna do a smoked cheddar, smoked Gouda, and Colby for my triple cheese. There we go. Some days we have it where it's like, use up all the cheese in the, you know, you get your cheese drawer, your meat drawer, and it has like so many like half open packages. And I was like, okay, no specialty ones. It's just use up what we have in there before anyone else can open up another pack of cheese, because you don't want things to go to waste. And this is smoked Gouda, because it's going to be good. And I'll do a Kobe Jack on here. And we'll take a little step away, and we're going to have our cabbage added in. We wanted to bring it to a nice boil because when I add the cabbage in, it's going to cool down the soup just a little bit. But that way it will bring it right back up. So I didn't want to do it right away because then it cools down the broth really quickly. So we're going to stir in our cabbage, and the more it cooks, it will turn nice and tender in about 5 minutes. Beautiful. Okay. We're going to just let that simmer now. I'm just pushing all of that cabbage underneath the broth. Perfect. Okay. Now let's get finishing assembling these. I'm going to turn on my skillet to starting at about a 7. This is going to start cooking our grilled cheeses while I finish assembling them. And we're going to put some pepperoni. So for my husband, and the trick is you don't want to do a super thick layer of meat, otherwise your cheeses won't melt, or you'll burn your bread trying to get your cheese to melt. So just a really nice thin layer across. And my daughter will have pepperonis on her. Hers is kind of like a pizza melt. Let's break these apart. She always loves it when I do like the bougie grilled cheeses. When during the summer when we are like smoking briskets, she loves the brisket grilled cheese. There, let's add the second part of our cheeses for here, and then we can. So we've got the pepper jack there. Good with his. Then my daughter wanted some tomato. Okay, got to get my little hack. I always struggle opening jars, so I just take a butter knife and I'm going to just, there we go. You pop it underneath until it has air and boom. Now we're going to add a nice layer of sun-dried tomatoes across hers. Beautiful. And then mine is done. And then where's hers? It's the mozzarella. And you just don't want your cheese to overflow your bread. Otherwise, it will just burn on the skillet instead of being on your sandwich. Okay. Let's give this a nice stir. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. The great thing about cooking with a Dutch oven is it really retains the heat in there, unlike when you're cooking with like a all metal pot. Those lose their heat much faster. Okay, let's prep up our garnishes that we're going to put on at the last minute. We have some fresh parsley and we have some green onions, and this is just going to add a really lovely flavor to the broth. But you want to add it at the very end so that it doesn't wilt and it stays fresh. So I'm going to give this a nice wash. Just squeeze it out. And then we're going to mince this up fairly fine. I'll pull out a couple stems if you want, because you really just want the leaves. And this is just curly parsley. So just a fresh parsley will add a nice little brightness to our soup at the very end and a pop of color. But again, you want to add it at the very end so you can really taste the freshness of it, especially in a soup that's really hearty like this. You want to keep that little fresh notes to it to kind of cut through the super heartiness of the bacon and the potatoes and the cabbage. And then we've got our green onions. I'm just going to pull off the tops of them because sometimes, you know, as you buy them, but they sit in your fridge and they start to get a little flimsy. That's because they've lost a lot of their moisture. And those just end up being really chewy. So I just take them off and we'll just chop up the remaining. There we go. And of course, I'll chop it up until the very bottoms, and then I don't use the white part. The white part is edible, but it's just chewy and not as good. So we have those ready to pop in here. Beautiful. And then I'm going to taste our broth, make sure we don't need to add anything else to it. Perfect. The bacon really is highlighted in the broth. Like you can taste it and it's just absolutely lovely. Perfect. Now let's see if our grilled cheeses are ready for their first flip. Okay. And remember, we're going to do 3 more flips. The first one is really like on each side is to warm up the bread and start the cheese melting process, because grilled cheese can take like a hot minute to warm up. And if you just leave it there, you're going to get a nice crispy thing, but not melted for it. Okay. We've got our broth and our soup. Let me check how tender our potatoes are so we know about how much longer we have on there. So here's the carrots. You can see I can already push my fork through the carrot, so fairly tender. Let's go on to our potato, and we're going to see about our potato. Almost, I can push through it pretty good. So the soup will be ready in just a second. Well, while we're waiting on there, I'm going to feed my 2 starters because tonight we are going to be making some homemade bread. And in order for us to make homemade sourdough bread, I need my feeder or my sourdough starters to both be nice and active. And so I like to feed them around lunchtime, and then we can make our bread at dinner time.
To clarify, you're making the dough.
Yes, I'll make the start of it. Sourdough bread takes a hot minute to, like, it takes about 2 days. There we go. We're going to do the final.
So it's the dough tonight and...
Yes, and then tomorrow we'll bake it up. But it does. I will say, you don't, like, if you are new and you're thinking about getting into doing sourdough and the bread, you're not going to wake up one day and say, oh, let's make bread. Let's do sourdough. You've got to make your starter, which can take, anywhere between a week to 10 days to get it fermented to where it's good enough for a bread. And then the whole process of a sourdough bread takes about 2 days. And so it is timely, but it's not hard work. It's just time consuming. Like, you're not waiting forever. Like doing active stuff forever is a lot of passive time, but it is like something that takes, you've got to do your stretch and fold, then bulk rise, and then put it in your fridge for your bulk proof. So it does take a minute. I'm putting 10 tablespoons in each of mine, and then I'll add 10 tablespoons of water. 9 and 10. And so when you feed it, you just give it half and half. So half, like the same amount of like tablespoons of flour to the same amount of water. And then you want to also depending on how much starter you have in there. So 4, 5.
You're off by 1.
Oh, okay. 7. See, I can't talk. And 8, 9, 10. That's the biggest thing is I'll be like cooking and I'll be like measuring something out and somebody comes and talks to me and I'm like, how many cups of flour did I put into this? Okay, we're going to add, let me just check on these real quick because we don't want to burn our grilled cheeses. Oh, still turn them up a little warmer. Okay, since I added 10 tablespoons of flour to each one, I need to add 150 milligrams of water because a tablespoon has 15 milliliters in it. And I just find it's easier to do it this way than to measure out 10 tablespoons. I got these cups and they have both like the US customary measurements on it as well as the metric, which is great because if you're into baking, a lot of baking uses just the metric system because it's much more exact than the US customary system with baking because 1 cup of flour could vary by 50 grams when cooking because there could be an air pocket in it. It could be packed down. And so a lot of baking really needs the exact measurements, which is why they do it through weight. Okay, let me give this a nice stir, and it's kind of goopy, but your starter is active is when you come back in like an hour or 2, it starts to bubble and grow and get bigger. Beautiful. Got these lovely crispy crusts on them. Our grilled cheeses are just about done. Let me rotate. Perfect. And then our soup is simmering here. Let me give it a nice stir. And as you can see, the cabbage has even started to wilt up more, which is beautiful. And then we're going to add in our green onions and our parsley in just a second. So I've got this guy mixed up. If you fed your starter or feeding the starter simply adding the flour and the water and it has not bubbled up after an hour or 2, then you're probably going to need to work on re-fermenting it. It's not like busy, it's not alive enough, it's not working as well. So you might need to wait a couple more days of doing feeds to ferment it a bit longer. It's because that nice bubble is what you need to get your rise in your sourdough so you don't have a gummy bread. If it's under fermented, it's going to be gummy. Okay, so we mix it up and I'm just going to pour a little bit in here simply because I have, if you don't leave enough space on the top of your jar, I'll come back over and they'll be like exploding out because the fermentation process just brings in so much like oxygen and it bubbles. And then we're going to put our cheesecloth cover over it and move this guy. Here's my other one. You can buy these on a set on Amazon. I recommend if you're going into sourdough, just buy yourself a set. It saves you so much time trying to figure out all of these things on your own. Perfect. Beautiful. Okay, let me turn off my skillet, move it up. Let's add our last ingredients into our soup, and then we are going to serve up because lunch is ready. So these are our minced or our sliced up green onions. It's about 1/3 of a cup, maybe between 1/4 and 1/3 of a cup. And then we have about, again, around 1/3 and 1/4 of a cup of fresh parsley. And this is just going to add a nice pop of color, but really a nice fresh vibrance to the really hearty broth because it does, like the bacon is a strong flavor in this. But look how beautiful that looks. Okay, I'm going to turn this off. And now let's get ready to serve up lunch. I'll get my little cauldron down. And we're going to get a ladle. Okay. So, for lunch today, we're going to have a lovely triple cheese, grilled cheese. And then we're going to serve it up with some lovely Irish cabbage soup with bacon, potatoes, carrots, cabbage, and some fresh herbs. And that is our lunch today. And of course, we will have our yummy chocolate muffins for dessert. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We try to do live cooking shows every single day. We kind of show you what we're cooking for our family. Everything we make, we eat. We're a big family, as we mentioned. But again, we enjoy you guys joining us. Don't forget to send us a message or comments if you have any questions about cooking or want to see some recipes. Thanks again for joining.